But the top story is the trial of George Zimmerman in the death of Trayvon Martin. For days, much of the evidence has been technical, but today's testimony featured raw emotion. Trayvon Martin's mother listened to a replay of a 911 tape of screams she believes were the last words of her son. Sarah Doloff has details.
Somber moments in court this morning as the mother of Trayvon Martin testified about screams on a 911 call.
Ma'am, that screaming or yelling, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
Sybrina Fulton's time on the stand was brief. The defense questioned if she may have been predisposed to believing it was her son on the tape instead of George Zimmerman.
You certainly had to hope that that was your son screaming even before you heard it, correct?
I didn't hope for anything. I just simply listened to the tape.
You certainly hope, as a mom, you certainly hope that your son, Trayvon Martin, would not have done anything that would have led to his own death, correct?
What I hope for is that this wouldn't have never happened and he would still be here.
Absolutely.
That's my hope.
Now, as compelling as that was, Martin's mother was not the only mother that this jury heard from today. It also heard from George Zimmerman's mother, who heard her son on the tape. Take a listen.
I would say terror.
And is that the anguish, fear, and terror, without question, of your son's voice?
Yes, sir.
So two very different identifications. Michael Coyne, NECN legal analyst from the Mass School of Law, the associate dean there. So a jury's hearing from two mothers, and mothers should be pretty good judges of what they hear as far as a voice goes. What's this jury to believe? They heard each mother say, "That's my son."
Well, both mothers were very credible, and I think both mothers genuinely and honestly believe that that's their son's voice crying for help on that tape. A more cynical observer would say, well, if your mother won't support you in your time of need, who would? That is a mother's job. But the fact is they both put human faces on a very real tragedy, that their sons are in deep, deep trouble. One is dead and the other is likely potentially looking at life in jail. And what this does now is it humanizes both faces, and it presents the Martin family presented a very polished, professional, and real face to Trayvon Martin. He didn't look like a thug if you look at his family.
You know, and it was interesting, there was also a point and counterpoint on the part of other members of the family. The prosecution presented Trayvon's brother, who identified it as his brother's voice, and the defense presented the uncle of George Zimmerman, who said, I think that's George's voice. So the jury's getting all this conflicting information.
Well, and they will be able to pick and choose which witnesses they feel more credible. The other reason for the brother is the brother is in his last year at college. It's almost a what might have been had Trayvon been allowed to finish his high school and go on to college. And he also presented a very polished image and a very real family member, putting a face on Trayvon that we hadn't previously seen.
All right, now at this point in the trial, the prosecution is done with its case. They rested today. And what's your evaluation and your assessment as you've seen so far? We've watched most of this together. What do you think? How'd they do?
I think they've done a very poor job, both in preparing their witnesses and presenting their case. Now, I'm not suggesting they had the greatest case in the world going in for second-degree murder, but I also think there are a number of gaffes that we saw from time to time, even today, where they finished with the medical examiner and the testimony was sloppy and at times unprofessional. He evaded many of the questions by saying it wasn't his job. There was just a general sense that that's a lot of the information I was receiving from him I couldn't trust, and we've seen that in other pieces of the government's case here. I'm disturbed at the level of professionalism that we should have seen in a case of this magnitude, and we just haven't seen it in the government's case.
You know, you mentioned the medical examiner, and something came up that we both took note of today. So much has been made in this case. There was a ruling ahead of time that neither side could bring up Trayvon Martin's past marijuana use or evidence of past marijuana use. But today we heard, with the jury out of the room, this medical examiner said, yes, I did find traces of THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, in his system. It would not have affected him physically, I don't believe, but in my opinion, that opinion has changed. I think it would have affected him mentally.
Yes.
And that just put a different spin on this. Now, the evidence is still not going to be brought in, but it's something that has changed, and we haven't heard the last of it, I don't know.
I think that's right, Mike. We haven't heard the last of it. The judge is still solid with her ruling, saying that she's not going to allow in past use of the marijuana. However, this marijuana was used within a relatively reasonable time period to the events in question, and I think that does make it more relevant as to whether that would have affected his mental status that night, and I think you'll see again the defense try to open this door a little further in their own presentation of the evidence.
And that presentation begins on Monday. I know you'll be here at NECN. Michael Coyne of the Mass School of Law. It's been great to have you. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks,
Have a
Mike.
great weekend.